Sports presents Benning Bites with Damon Benning. Benning Bites with Damon Benning.
Another episode. That's me. I had to collect my thoughts just for a second. A lot going on. And as we kind of head in, coming off the weekend and Friday's show and that first segment and talking about the Jet Awards and kind of where we're at and seeing people come together, it was just a time to kind of catch up and gather my thoughts as we ramp up into this final week, and appreciate you being a part of what we do. Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube TV, 590, KFOR in Lincoln after 9 o'clock. Thank you. And I mean that. I don't want to just pass through that like no big deal, no big deal. And my best Dr. Sadler voice. It's spring game week. And I go back to something I said Friday. I was talking to Shafe about embracing the grind and kind of the struggle and how it kind of feels better if you make a ton of money and you started with a couple of bucks versus if you inherited $1 million and you grew it into 10 as like a trust fund baby, right? I don't know. It's as poor as an example as I could give. And while both could have benefits, is there one that you feel better about or don't feel like you have to apologize for? And for each perspective, it's different, right? Like you can't apologize for being a part of a family that was once successful or a business or whatever. And same as you shouldn't apologize for growing up maybe without some of the advantages that some of the people in your sphere of influence have had. And it just got me thinking on kind of like a deeper level, right? Should you apologize for winning and having success in the past and apologize for winning and feel like it's because you've had success in the past? And I think that's the duality of the fan base, right? It's like, why should I apologize because we had 30 years of good football? And then it's, people want me to apologize for feeling like I shouldn't have to apologize for feeling good that we had 30 years of good football, or however, whatever you quantify it. Let's roughly say 30. I say 70s through the 90s. And so for me, in talking to Shafe, I said, is it possible, when I asked him the question, who is it more important for to kind of embrace the struggle and understand the duality of what it means to be Nebraska? Yeah, there's the good, and you shouldn't apologize for it, and you should embrace it because you think there's a time for you to get back to it. Or, man, there's a standard, and I'm not talking about national championships. I just want to be relevant. I'm not apologizing for that, and if I address it and you can't deal with it, that's your fault, right? Like there's a couple of different worlds. And I know for Coach Rule and that staff, where he picked those young, hungry lions, right, that wouldn't rest and be spoiled because they're at Disneyland compared to world, compared to being at Worlds of Fun. You can't apologize, right? You just don't get to walk out on the field and assume the role without putting in the work and going through the struggle. But understand, because you're part of this tradition and storied program, you should feel a certain way. Isn't that tough? Some people call it a conundrum. I call it life. Like the ability to manage multiple perspectives. And that's really what we've got to do. But how important is it for the fan base? Shafe, and I understand it. He said, listen, you can't ask a fan base to be a part of that when they've endured for X amount of years, right? It's just not how it goes. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. But then I asked a follow-up question. I said, what if you take on that mindset and it helps you be patient through the process of a new coach? And you're like, well, we've been doing that. But you have to remember, and I can't apologize for it. I can only explain it. I come from an educational background, right? Certified K-8, emphasis mild to moderate special ed. And what I think all great educators, not that I was one, or great coaches. Not that I have been one, but I know a few. I'm like the guy that stayed at a Holiday Inn once. They meet people right where they're at. Right where you're at, I'm going to meet you, as opposed to holding you to some standard that I want you to be at in my mind that you're not prepared to be. We do it all the time. But it's hard as a fan. If I'm a boss and you're my employee, it's hard for me to think that you're going to be a finished product. I embrace teaching you and growing the business. We're patient then. If I'm an educator and I have students that are making A's and students that are making D's, I have to meet you right where you're at, and I embrace it. But it's different, and maybe you've earned the right. So there's no judgment here, but what I'm saying is giving a different perspective. You've been a certain way for a certain amount of time, but it wasn't for this coach. It was for other staffs, and you've endured. So do you have it in you as somebody in a place of business that gets a new employee, even though you've had 10 others, and you've done the same thing, and you'll somehow muster the ability to meet that new employee right where he or she is at, or the new student, or the new coworker? Do we have it in us to meet Coach Rule and this staff right where they're at? Not bringing in 20 years, not bringing in 15 years, not bringing in the last 5 years. We do it in other facets of our life. Why is it so hard to do with our sports teams? I don't know. I think partly because we've spoken into existence, so we live up to it. Fan is short for fanatic, so we've given ourselves the subconscious let them off the hook because we know it means we're not rational. Fan is short for fanatic. Does that mean you can't be rational? Why? Because somebody told you that's what it means? Nah, you absolutely can be. And can you meet Coach Rule and this staff right where they're at? If you can, and you can cheer for other people, even if it's at your expense, while they're going through the grind, that's where the magic happens. When I can cheer for LP and I know he took my job. When I can cheer for AG and I'm like, man, that was me. Or, Jared Tomich can cheer for Grant Wistrom, even though he's taking some playing time. Or Ed Stewart can cheer for Doug Coleman, even though he's taking some playing time. Or Michael Rose-Ivy can cheer for another linebacker, even though he's taking some playing time. Those things that can happen, that's when the magic happens. Can you imagine what it would be like to empower this staff, knowing they're cognizant of being a representative of the state and being proud of where we're at? Can you imagine how they would feel empowered if you met them right where they're at? You didn't hold the last 20 years against them. Like my man Tim Miles once told Dirk Chatlin, the great Dirk Chatlin, don't put that crap on me.
Don't put that crap on me.
Exactly. Thank you. What if we didn't do that? Imagine how that staff would go to work. Oh, we're in this together. You told me it was a multi-year process. You believed it was a multi-year process. You've used Temple and Baylor as examples, and you know I didn't get it done in the first year. Can you hold yourself accountable? I don't know. Or do we just own a name? I used to tell people, well, he called me such and such. Well, you give that name ownership. You as the person that were called the name, you give it ownership. You give it power. It's not just because they call you it that you have to be it. It's just not. Somebody calls me stupid. Doesn't mean I have to be stupid. Right? I just don't. So somebody calls you a fanatic. It doesn't mean you have to be a fanatic. I just asked the question. I don't know the answer, but that's what we'll get to here. Don't miss the show coming up in just a few minutes. It's Coffee and Cream. Give my man Andrew Rogers a follow at Andrew Rogers TV. You got any questions? 888-638-4876. And really, whatever you want to talk about, let me know. These ideas I just don't birth on my own typically. They usually come from fostering thought of something that was on your fine folks' mind. And we are here for it. It's another episode of Betting Bites.